we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. T.S. Eliot. Almost every spiritual tradition offers some version of escape, ascension, transcendence, liberation, nirvana, heaven. The promise is always the same. If you do the work, if you purify yourself, if you accumulate enough merit, enough insight, enough devotion, you will be released from this world. You will graduate. You will move on to something better, somewhere easier, somewhere more aligned with what you actually are. And that promise is seductive, because earth is hard, the pressure is real, the suffering is persistent, the ambiguity is exhausting, and the idea that all of this is temporary, that it is just a test you need to pass, that the real life, the real you, exists somewhere else. It makes the difficulty tolerable. It gives you something to work toward, a light at the end of the tunnel, a reason to endure. But the promise is false, not because there is no progression, not because development does not continue, but because the progression does not lead away from Earth. It leads deeper into it. The more you develop, the more capacity you build, the more coherence you establish, the more you are required to engage with the exact conditions you thought you were escaping. And the beings who have developed the most, who have the deepest insight, the greatest capacity, the highest coherence, they are not the ones who left. They are the ones who stayed. And they stayed on purpose. This is the inversion most people never see. They assume that awakening means leaving, that the more awake you become, the less connected you are to Earth, to the body, to the material conditions. But the opposite is true. The more awake you are, the more present you become, the more grounded, the more embedded, the more capable of engaging with complexity without needing to escape it. Awakening does not produce detachment, it produces integration. And integration requires you to be here, fully, not as a punishment, but as the only context where the development you are designed for can actually occur. The function of difficulty. Earth is not a mistake. It is not a fallen world. It is not a prison. It is a high-pressure developmental environment. And the pressure is not incidental. The pressure is the mechanism. It is what produces the depth of character, the quality of coherence, the kind of capacity that cannot be developed in easier conditions. Think about what pressure does to carbon. Under normal conditions, carbon is soft, pliable, unremarkable. But when you subject carbon to extreme pressure over extended time, it becomes diamond. Not because the pressure destroyed it, but because the pressure reorganized its molecular structure into something fundamentally different, something harder, something clearer, something capable of holding more tension, refracting more light, enduring more force. You are the same. The pressure you are under is not random. It is not cruel. It is structural. It is reorganizing you. And what it is reorganizing you into is not something that can exist in low-pressure environments. The coherence you are building here, through consequence, through ambiguity, through the persistent weight of navigating conditions that do not have clear answers, that coherence is specific to this context. And once you develop it here, you do not leave. You return, with capacity, with presence, with the ability to hold complexity that beings who developed in easier conditions cannot hold. This is why escape is not the design, because the beings the system needs most are the ones who can function here, on Earth, in the pressure, in the difficulty, in the exact conditions that most people are trying to transcend. Those beings, the ones who stayed, who integrated, who chose to remain awake inside the hardest developmental environment in the local system, they are not lesser. They are essential. And the system does not let them leave because it needs them here, not as punishment, but as anchors, as stabilizers, as sources of coherence in an environment designed to produce fragmentation. And here is what most people miss about pressure. The pressure you experience is calibrated to your capacity. You are not being crushed. You are being compressed into something more dense, more coherent, more capable of holding force without shattering. And the fact that the pressure feels unbearable is not evidence that it is too much. It is evidence that you are at the edge of your current capacity. And the edge is where development happens. The system does not give you pressure you cannot handle. It gives you pressure you can barely handle. And in learning to handle it, in learning to remain coherent under that specific weight, you build capacity. And once that capacity stabilizes, the pressure increases. Not because the system is sadistic, but because increased pressure is the only way to develop increased capacity. That is Earth. That is the assignment. And the difficulty is not evidence that you are failing. It is evidence that you are being developed. The illusion of higher worlds. There is a belief, common in spiritual frameworks, that higher development means access to higher worlds. That as you progress, you move through levels of reality that are progressively more refined, more harmonious, more aligned with truth. And that Earth, being dense, material, conflicted, is the lowest level, the place you are trying to leave behind. But that framing is backwards. Earth is not the lowest level. Earth is the most complex level. It is the environment where the most variables are active simultaneously, where free will, consequence, ambiguity, materiality, relationship, time, and development all intersect. And that intersection creates pressure. Not because the system failed, but because complexity under constraint is what produces depth. Higher worlds, in the sense of less complex worlds, exist, and development happens there too. But it is a different kind of development. It is refinement. The deepening of capacities that were initiated in more complex environments. It is not where you start. It is where you go after you have built foundational coherence in a place that required you to integrate more variables than you thought possible. Earth is not the bottom. Earth is the forge, and the beings who are forged here, who develop the capacity to remain coherent under the weight of this many active variables, they are not trying to leave the forge. They are trying to master it, because mastery of complexity is what the system needs, and complexity cannot be mastered in simple environments. It can only be mastered here, in the pressure, in the difficulty, in the exact conditions that feel unbearable until you stop resisting them and start using them. This is why the escape narrative is so damaging, because it trains you to see Earth as the problem, as the thing you need to transcend. And in doing that, it prevents you from recognizing that Earth is the opportunity, the place where the kind of development that matters most can actually occur. And when you spend your life trying to escape the opportunity, you miss it. The trap of spiritual bypass. There is a pattern common in spiritual communities. People who have done the work, who have meditated for years, who have studied the teachings, who can speak fluently about consciousness, about awakening, about the nature of reality, and yet their lives are chaos. Their relationships are fractured, their bodies are dysregulated, their responsibilities are neglected. And when you ask how someone can be so spiritually advanced, but so practically dysfunctional, they tell you that those things do not matter, that they are illusions, attachments, that the real work is happening on the inner planes, in higher consciousness, beyond the material. This is spiritual bypass, and it is rampant because it allows people to avoid the hardest work, the work of integration, by convincing themselves that the work they are avoiding does not actually matter. But bypass is not development. Bypass is avoidance, and what you avoid does not go away. It accumulates, it compounds, it shows up in your body as illness, in your relationships as chaos, in your life as persistent instability that you cannot seem to resolve no matter how much inner work you do. Because the inner work, when disconnected from outer integration, is not work, it is performance. It is a way to feel like you are progressing while actually remaining stuck. Real development does not bypass the material, it integrates it. It recognizes that the body is not something to transcend, but something to inhabit. That relationships are not distractions, but contexts where coherence is tested and refined. That responsibilities are not burdens, but opportunities to demonstrate that your inner alignment produces outer capacity. And here is the test. If your spirituality makes you less functional, less present, less capable of navigating ordinary life, it is not spirituality. It is escape. Real spirituality makes you more functional, more present, more capable, not because it makes life easier, but because it gives you the tools to remain coherent inside difficulty. You cannot transcend what you have not integrated. And Earth, being the most material, the most complex, the most demanding environment, is where integration is required most. Not as a stepping stone, as the foundation. And when you try to skip the foundation, the structure collapses. Every time. Because awakening without integration is not awakening, it is dissociation. And dissociation, no matter how spiritually it is framed, does not produce coherence. It produces fragmentation. And fragmentation is the exact opposite of what you are here to develop. The return is recognition. There is a moment, usually after years of seeking, where the orientation shifts, where you stop looking for the next teaching, the next practice, the next breakthrough. And you recognize that what you were seeking was never absent. It was here, in the ordinary, in the difficulty, in the exact life you were trying to transcend. This is not resignation. This is not giving up. This is the recognition that the goal was never to leave. The goal was to return, to come back to the life you are actually living, the body you are actually inhabiting, the relationships you are actually navigating, and to be fully present inside them. Not as someone who is waiting for things to get better, but as someone who is here on purpose, who chose this, who recognizes that this is not the problem. This is the assignment. And when that recognition happens, when you stop trying to escape and start trying to integrate, everything changes. The pressure does not decrease. The difficulty does not disappear. But your relationship to it shifts. You stop experiencing it as something happening to you and start experiencing it as something you are inside for a reason. The Buddhists have a version of this. After enlightenment, the laundry. After awakening, you return to ordinary life. Not because awakening failed, but because awakening was never about leaving ordinary life. It was about inhabiting it without the delusion that it is supposed to be something other than what it is. That delusion is what creates suffering, not the conditions, the resistance to the conditions. And when the delusion collapses, when you recognize that there is nowhere else to go, that this is it, the resistance collapses, and what remains is presence. And presence is what produces coherence. The mature spirituality. Immature spirituality is about escape, about transcending the body, the ego, the world, about rising above. It is driven by the belief that what you are now is not enough, that you need to be purified, perfected, transformed into something more acceptable. Mature spirituality is about integration, about inhabiting what you actually are, about recognizing that the body is not a prison, it is a vehicle, that the ego is not the enemy, it is a function, that the world is not a trap, it is a context. And that development is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more of what you actually are. Mature spirituality does not promise relief. It does not promise ease. It does not promise escape. It promises coherence, the capacity to remain present under pressure, the ability to hold complexity without fragmenting, the skill to navigate ambiguity without collapsing. And all of that is built here, on Earth, in the difficulty. And here is what makes mature spirituality so rare. It requires you to give up the fantasy that you deserve better conditions, that the universe owes you ease. Mature spirituality requires you to accept that you are exactly where you are supposed to be, that the difficulty is not evidence of failure, it is evidence of function, and that the only way forward is to stop resisting and start engaging. Mature spirituality also requires you to give up the timeline, the belief that once you complete this phase, you graduate to the next. Development does not end. Difficulty does not stop. Complexity does not decrease. What changes is your capacity to navigate it. You return to the same lessons at deeper levels. You face the same challenges with greater stakes. And the fact that you keep encountering the same patterns is not evidence that you are failing. It is evidence that you are deepening. The moment you stop trying to progress toward escape, the moment you accept that this is it, that you are here and this is where development is happening, you relax. The striving stops, the performance stops, and what remains is presence, just being here, doing the work, navigating the difficulty, without needing it to mean something more than what it is. The choice to stay. At some point, after enough development, after enough coherence, you are given a choice. Not explicitly, not through words, but through recognition. The recognition that you could leave, that you have built enough capacity, enough coherence, that the pressure that was once necessary for your development is no longer required. And in that moment, you choose. Do you leave or do you stay? The beings who choose to stay, who recognize that their capacity is needed here more than it is needed elsewhere, who decide that the development they have undergone was not for their own escape, but for the stabilization of the system they are embedded in, those beings are the ones who hold Earth together. They are the anchors, the stabilizers, the sources of coherence in an environment that is constantly generating fragmentation. They do not stay because they are trapped. They stay because they are needed. And they recognize that being needed here, in the hardest developmental environment in the local system, is not a lesser assignment. It is the assignment that matters most. Because without coherent beings choosing to remain embedded in high-pressure environments, those environments collapse. They fragment. They lose the stability required for other beings to develop. This is the choice. And it is not a choice you make once. It is a choice you make every day. Every time you are given the opportunity to escape, to numb, to transcend, to leave, and you choose to stay, to remain present, to engage, to hold the tension, to be here, fully, even when here is hard. And here is what the choice to stay actually looks like in practice. It looks like choosing to have the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. It looks like staying in the relationship when it would be easier to leave. It looks like doing the unglamorous work that no one sees instead of chasing the visible achievement that everyone celebrates. It looks like showing up for the people who need you even when you do not feel like showing up. It looks like holding space for someone who is fragmenting even when your own coherence feels fragile. These are not grand gestures. They are ordinary moments. Moments where you have the choice to escape, to numb, to retreat. And you choose differently. You choose to stay, to be present, to engage. Not because it feels good, but because it is the assignment. And the assignment is not about you. It is about the system, about the beings embedded in the same conditions who need someone to model coherence, who need someone to demonstrate that presence is possible even when the pressure is high. That is the return. And it is the only spirituality that actually works, not because it makes you feel better, but because it makes you more coherent. And coherence, when sustained, is what produces the kind of presence that stabilizes everything around it. Earth as assignment. You were not sent here as punishment. You were not exiled. You are not randomly assigned. You are here because this is the assignment you are capable of completing. And the fact that it feels hard, that it feels like more than you can handle, that is not evidence that you are in the wrong place. That is evidence that you are in the exact place designed to produce the capacity you are capable of developing. Earth is not for everyone. There are beings who develop in easier contexts, who build capacity through stability, through harmony, through conditions that do not require them to integrate as many variables. And that is fine. That is their assignment. But it is not yours. Your assignment is here, in the pressure, in the complexity, in the difficulty that most beings cannot tolerate. And the fact that you are here, that you have survived this long, that you have built any coherence at all inside these conditions, that is not luck. That is function. You are functioning inside the assignment you were designed for. The goal is not to escape the assignment. The goal is to complete it, to remain here, fully present, fully coherent, fully engaged, until the capacity you are building stabilizes into something that cannot be shaken by the conditions. And once that happens, you do not leave. You deepen. You integrate further. You become more embedded. Because the system needs coherent beings at every level, and the level that needs them most is the one where fragmentation is most likely, which is here, on Earth. You are here on purpose. The difficulty is on purpose. The pressure is on purpose. And the goal is not to make it easier. The goal is to remain coherent inside it. To recognize that presence here, in these conditions, is the only thing that produces the coherence you have been seeking through escape. And here is what recognizing Earth as assignment changes. When you believe you are in the wrong place, when you believe the pressure is evidence of failure, difficulty feels like punishment, like something that should not be happening. And that framing produces resentment, the chronic sense that you are being cheated out of the life you deserve. But when you recognize that you are in the right place, that the conditions are calibrated to your capacity, difficulty stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like training, like the exact resistance required to build the strength you do not yet have. You stop asking why this is happening to you and start asking what this is developing in you. That is not positive thinking. That is structural orientation. The recognition that you are not a victim of random circumstances. You are a participant in a developmental system that is applying pressure with precision. And the pressure is not too much. It is exactly enough, exactly calibrated to push you to the edge of your current capacity without pushing you over it. And the edge is where you grow, the integration of cosmos and Earth. At the beginning of this arc, you learned about the cosmos, about the architecture, about the order, about the hierarchy, about the structure that exists beyond what you can perceive. And that knowledge was necessary, because you needed to understand that you are not random, that you are embedded in a system that is coherent, lawful, and purposeful. But if that knowledge stays abstract, if it stays in the cosmos and never comes back to Earth, it becomes escapism. A way to avoid the life you are actually living, by focusing on the life you imagine you will live once you transcend this one. The integration is the recognition that the cosmos and Earth are not separate, that the order you learned about in the abstract is present here, in the material, in the immediate, that the hierarchy is not somewhere else. It is here, operating through you, responding to your choices, reflecting your coherence or your fragmentation with perfect accuracy. This is the return, bringing the cosmos back to Earth, recognizing that the knowledge was never meant to take you away. It was meant to help you understand what you are inside, so that you could stop resisting it and start engaging with it. And once you recognize that the cosmos is expressing itself through Earth, through you, through the choices you make in the most ordinary moments, you stop waiting for transcendence. You stop postponing presence, and you start being here, fully, as the only place where the integration you are seeking can actually occur, the daily return. The return is not a single event. It is a practice, a daily choice, a moment-by-moment orientation. It is the choice to be here instead of somewhere else, to be present instead of distracted, to engage instead of escape, to align instead of fragment. Most people live in postponement. They are here, but they are not present. They are waiting for conditions to improve, for clarity to arrive, for the difficulty to pass, for the moment when things finally make sense and they can stop struggling and start living. But that moment never comes because the conditions do not improve in the way they expect. Clarity does not arrive as certainty. Difficulty does not pass. It changes form. And the next stage is just more of this stage at a higher level of complexity. The return is the recognition that there is nothing to wait for. That this is it. That the life you are living right now is the life you are supposed to be living. That the difficulty you are navigating is the difficulty you are supposed to be navigating. And that presence here, in this moment, in this body, in this situation, is the only thing that produces coherence. Coherence is not the absence of difficulty. Coherence is the capacity to remain integrated inside difficulty, to hold tension without fragmenting, to navigate ambiguity without collapsing, to make decisions without certainty and remain stable regardless of the outcome. That is coherence, and it is built here, in the return, in the choice to stop escaping and start engaging. Here is what the return looks like in practice. You wake up. The day ahead feels heavy. You have tasks you do not want to do, conversations you do not want to have, responsibilities you did not choose. The default is to escape, to numb, to distract, to get through the day without actually being present for it. But the return is the choice to stay, to feel the heaviness without trying to make it go away, to do the tasks without resentment, to have the conversations without performing, to carry the responsibilities without fragmenting under the weight. That is the return. Not dramatic, not transcendent, just present. And presence, when sustained, is what produces the coherence you have been seeking through escape. And here is what makes the daily return so challenging. It requires you to give up the hope that things will get easier, that if you just endure a little longer, the pressure will decrease and life will become manageable. But the pressure does not decrease. It increases. Because increased pressure is how the system develops increased capacity. And the more capacity you build, the more you are trusted with. The more complexity you can hold, the more complexity you are given. This is not punishment. This is progression. And progression means that the difficulty does not stop. It just becomes the kind of difficulty that requires the capacity you just built. And if you are waiting for the difficulty to stop before you start being present, you will wait forever. Because the difficulty is the mechanism, and the mechanism does not stop. It just calibrates, and what it calibrates to is your capacity. The daily return is the practice of meeting that edge without collapsing, of waking up each day knowing that you will be required to hold more than feels comfortable, and choosing to do it anyway. Not because you enjoy it, but because you recognize that this is the assignment. You are here to stay. This is the seal, the recognition that changes everything. You are not passing through. You are not here temporarily. You are not waiting to leave. You are here, and you are here on purpose. And the purpose is not to escape. The purpose is to remain, to develop, to integrate, to become someone capable of holding coherence inside conditions that would fragment most beings, and then to use that coherence not for your own escape, but for the stabilization of the system you are embedded in. Once you recognize it, once you stop resisting it, once you choose it consciously instead of enduring it unconsciously, the entire trajectory shifts. You stop trying to leave. You start trying to deepen. You stop seeking transcendence. You start seeking integration. You stop waiting for better conditions. You start building capacity inside the conditions you are actually in. And the paradox is that the moment you stop trying to escape, the moment you choose to stay, the moment you recognize that this is where you are supposed to be, the suffering decreases. Not because the conditions changed, but because the resistance collapsed. And resistance is what produces suffering, not the difficulty, the refusal to be present inside the difficulty. You are here to stay, not because you are trapped, but because you are needed. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you stop fragmenting, the sooner you stop escaping, the sooner you start building the coherence you were designed to build. And here is what staying means in the deepest sense. It means you stop hedging. You stop keeping one foot out the door. You stop maintaining the fantasy that if things get too hard, you can leave. You commit fully to being here, to this life, to this body, to these relationships, to these conditions, not because they are perfect, but because they are yours. And they are yours for a reason. And that reason is not to torment you. It is to develop you. And development requires commitment. The willingness to stay even when staying is hard. To engage even when engaging is painful. To remain present even when presence requires you to feel things you would rather avoid. That commitment is what produces depth, because depth is not built through casual engagement. It is built through sustained presence under pressure, through the repetition of showing up day after day, even when you do not feel like it, even when you are tired, even when the progress feels imperceptible. You stay, you engage, you remain. And over time, through that sustained presence, something shifts. The capacity you are building stabilizes. The coherence you are developing becomes baseline. And what once felt unbearable becomes tolerable. Not because it got easier, but because you got stronger, more integrated, more capable of holding what you could not hold before. That is what staying produces. Not escape from the difficulty, but capacity to remain coherent inside it. And that capacity, once developed, is what makes presence sustainable. And sustainable presence is what transforms Earth from a place you are trying to leave into a place you are willing to inhabit, fully, as the only context where the kind of development that matters most can actually occur. This episode did not come to convince you. It came to place you. If something in you recognized this, not believed it, not agreed with it, but remembered, write "I awaken" in the comments. Not as a signal to others, as a signal to yourself. The hierarchy responds to readiness, and readiness is always internal.